The sun was a pale, grudging presence in the sky above Oak Haven, a remote village nestled deep within a thick, ancient forest. The light it offered seemed to die before it reached the ground, caught in the dense canopy of oak trees that gave the village its name. The brutal reality of this place was not found in the grand conflicts of lords and kings, but in the quiet, unrelenting struggle against the earth itself. The year was 1342, and the village's fragile existence was entirely dependent on the harvest, a truth hammered home by the strange and terrifying blight that was now creeping across their fields. Elara, the village herbalist, a young woman with hands that knew the subtle language of roots and leaves, felt the change in her very bones. She was an outsider, brought to Oak Haven as a child after her family was lost to a fever, and her deep knowledge of the forest made her a figure of both reverence and suspicion. The villagers came to her for poultices and potions, but they watched her with a wary eye, quick to whisper of witchcraft and old magic when a cure failed. Today, as she stood on the edge of the wheat field, the whispers were a deafening chorus in her mind. The wheat, which should have been a vibrant gold, was instead a sickly, bruised brown, its stalks twisted and brittle. A dark, oily substance seemed to leak from the soil itself, a foul-smelling ichor that left the ground cracked and barren wherever it touched. It was a poison she had never seen before, a corruption that defied her every remedy. The first person to fall ill was Old Man Garland, the village elder. His sickness was as strange and baffling as the blight on the crops. His skin was pale and waxy, his veins standing out like black threads, and a cold, unnatural sweat clung to his brow. His mind, once sharp as flint, was now a confused, rambling jumble of half-remembered nursery rhymes and fragments of songs no one had ever heard before. Elara tried everything: willow bark for the fever, a decoction of elderflower for the chill, but nothing worked. The sickness clung to him, tightening its grip with each passing day. The villagers, terrified and desperate, saw a clear connection between the failing crops and the failing elder. Their fear, once a quiet hum, now turned into a roar. A mob gathered outside her small cottage, their torches casting long, flickering shadows on the packed earth walls. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man named Cale, his face a mask of furious grief, pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at her. "The land is sick because of her," he bellowed, his voice raw with emotion. "She talks to the trees, she brews strange liquids. This is her doing, a dark curse on our home." Elara stood firm, her heart a drumbeat of fear and resolve. She knew the truth lay not in her knowledge, but in the blighted soil itself. She had to find the source of the corruption, not just to save her life, but to save her home. That night, under the cold, unforgiving eye of the moon, she left the village, her satchel filled with her last few herbs and a small, worn-out knife. She was not going into the forest for a cure. She was going to face the source of the sickness itself. Guided by a strange, unsettling pull, she walked for hours, the air growing colder and denser with each step. The moonlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy, and the forest floor became a treacherous landscape of tangled roots and moss-covered stones. Eventually, the trees began to thin, and she found herself at the edge of a small, hidden clearing. In its center lay a well, but it was not like any well she had ever seen. Its stone walls were ancient and crumbling, covered in strange, serpentine carvings that seemed to writhe in the faint light. The well itself did not contain water, but a thick, black substance, a horrifying mirror of the ichor she had seen in the fields. A faint, low hissing sound seemed to emanate from the depths of the well, a sound that was not quite a whisper but something far more ancient and sinister. It was a sound that made the hair on her arms stand on end and sent a chill of primal dread down her spine. As she leaned closer, trying to discern the source of the corruption, a subtle movement caught her eye. Beneath the surface of the black ichor, a shape stirred, long and impossibly old, a living shadow that seemed to undulate with a sickening rhythm. The air filled with the scent of wet earth and something else, something ancient and venomous. And Elara knew with a bone-deep certainty that the true brutality of this world was not famine or fever, but the forgotten, malevolent things that lived beneath the ground. The hissing sound grew louder, more defined, and from the depths of the well, 2 pinpricks of crimson light opened, ancient eyes that watched her, and in that moment she realized she had not found the cure, she had found the source of the curse. The 2 pinpricks of crimson light that had opened in the depths of the black ichor were not a trick of the light, nor a figment of her terrified imagination. They were the cold, ancient, and malevolent eyes of something that had been waiting for centuries. Elara's breath caught in her throat, a choked gasp of pure, unadulterated terror. The hissing sound that had been a faint whisper now surged, a sibilant rush of air that seemed to press in on her from all sides, a sound that carried with it the stench of wet, decomposing earth and the chilling whisper of a hunger that had no end. The long, impossible shape beneath the surface of the oily black liquid began to writhe with a sickening, liquid grace. It was not a creature of flesh and blood, but a manifestation of pure corruption, a living shadow woven from the same foul substance that was poisoning the fields of Oakhaven. A tendril, slick and dripping with the black ichor, detached from the main mass and shot out towards her with unnatural speed, a serpentine dart of solid shadow. Elara's mind, which had always been so quick to catalogue and analyze, simply shut down. There was no herbal remedy for this, no lore that spoke of how to confront a thing that was older than the forest itself. Her body acted on instinct, a primal scream of self-preservation. She stumbled backward, her feet tangling in a gnarled root, and fell hard onto the damp earth. The tendril of black ichor, missing her by a hair's breadth, struck the ground where she had stood with a wet, sucking sound, and in that instant, the very soil beneath it withered and died, turning to a gray, lifeless dust. It was a terrifying demonstration of its power, a chilling glimpse into the future of her village if this creature was not stopped. Panic was a cold, sharp blade that sliced through her shock. She scrambled to her feet, her hands and knees scraped raw, and without a thought for her drop satchel, she turned and ran. She did not look back. The forest that had always been her sanctuary was now a prison of her own making, a labyrinth of shadows and whispering trees that seemed to be laughing at her. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig, was the sound of pursuit. She could feel the crimson eyes on her back, a physical weight that pressed down on her with a suffocating dread. The silent humming, the same sound that the villagers claimed had lured the missing men from their homes, was no longer a distant whisper. It was a throbbing, relentless presence in the air, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in her skull and made her vision blur at the edges. It was a song of despair, a lullaby for the soul, a melody that whispered promises of an end to all pain and all struggle, a seductive siren call to give up and let the darkness consume her. But the brutal reality of Oakhaven's plight, the image of her dying village and the waxy, pale face of Old Man Garland, were a stronger force than any song of despair. They were the anchor that kept her from giving in. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead, navigating the treacherous darkness with the desperate familiarity born of a lifetime spent in these woods. When she finally stumbled out of the forest and into the village clearing, the first light of dawn was just beginning to paint the sky with a weary gray. The mob that had threatened her was gone, dispersed by the coming of night and the need to tend to their blighted fields, but the silence was more menacing than any angry shouts. The village was a graveyard of silent fear. The farmers moved through their fields with hunched shoulders, their faces a mask of quiet desperation as they pulled the dead, brittle wheat from the ground. No one met her gaze. She was a ghost, a pariah, a living testament to their suspicions and a reminder of their shared helplessness. Elara tried to tell them, to explain what she had found, but the words died on her lips. How could she, a humble herbalist, describe a living shadow with ancient eyes to a people whose entire world was bound by the practicalities of soil and seed? They would think her mad, a witch truly in league with dark forces. She saw Kale, his face now etched with a profound, desolate sadness, and she knew her words would mean nothing to him now. His anger had turned to grief, a silent sorrow that had no room for wild tales. So she turned from them, her heart heavy with the weight of her knowledge, and walked towards the only place in Oakhaven that still held a semblance of hope, the small, humble church at the center of the village. Inside, the scent of stale incense and old wax candles clung to the air, a thin veneer of sanctity over a world that was rapidly descending into madness. Father Elias, the village priest, was a man of quiet wisdom, his face a road map of a life spent in prayer and contemplation. He was the village's last bastion of reason in a world governed by superstition and fear. He sat hunched over a heavy, leather-bound tome, its pages yellowed with age, its Latin script too old for most to decipher. Elara knelt before him, her voice cracking as she recounted her terrifying journey. She spoke of the black ichor, of the ancient, serpentine carvings, and finally, of the two crimson eyes that had watched her from the depths of the well. Father Elias listened, his face impassive at first, but as Elara spoke of the humming and the cold, primal fear, his hands, which had been resting on the ancient book, began to tremble. When she finished, a heavy silence fell between them. The only sound was the faint crackle of a dying fire in the hearth. "You have seen it," he said, his voice a low, horrified whisper. It was not a question. The blight, the sickness of the crops, Garland's madness, it all makes sense now. The well is not just a source of water, Elara. It is the seal. He turned the pages of the ancient book, his fingers tracing a diagram that was startlingly similar to the serpentine carvings on the well. This is a chronicle of Oakhaven's true history, a history older than our church, older than this village. Our ancestors, a people of the forest, found an ancient, malevolent spirit that lived beneath the earth, a thing that fed on despair and fear. It was a blight of the soul, and its presence caused the land to wither and the minds of men to crumble. They could not kill it, so they bound it. They used the power of the earth itself to construct a seal, a powerful ward that trapped the spirit in the depths of the ground. The well was not a source of water, it was the final part of that seal, a conduit for its power, a way to keep it bound. The serpentine carvings, Elara, they are the remnants of that binding ritual. We have been drinking from a cage for generations. His voice was now thick with a sorrowful dread. And now, for reasons we may never know, the seal is weakening. The ichor you saw, it is the creature itself, seeping through the cracks. The humming is its voice, and it is a voice that calls out to those with a spirit already broken by the hardships of this brutal world. The priest's words were a cold, horrifying clarity, an explanation for the madness that was enveloping their village. But it offered no solution. "What can we do?" Elara asked, her voice a desperate plea. Father Elias closed the book, his eyes filled with a weary determination. "We must reseal the well. But for that, we need something of immense power, something that can hold back a force that has been waiting for centuries. According to this chronicle, our ancestors did not just create the seal. They also created a key to it, a final, powerful ward that would secure the seal for generations. It was a holy relic, an amulet crafted from the first ore found in the hills, a piece of the earth itself, inscribed with the true symbols of the binding ritual. They hid it somewhere, far from the well, in a place where only those of pure heart and strong will could find it. The brutal reality of our time, Elara, is not just the hardship of our lives, but the forgotten evils that have returned. We are its first victims, but we do not have to be its last." Elara looked at the priest, a plan forming in her mind, a desperate hope in the face of insurmountable odds. The mission was no longer about her survival. It was about saving her village. The first part of the quest, the discovery, was complete. The second, the search for the lost relic, was about to begin. The sun had barely risen over the jagged treeline when Elara and Father Elias began their desperate quest. They moved like ghosts in the pre-dawn gloom, leaving behind the village of Oakhaven, which was slowly, inexorably turning to a place of silent, suffocating dread. The fields, once a tapestry of life, were now a wasteland of brittle, decaying stalks, and the villagers, their faces hollowed out by fear, moved like automatons. Their silent accusation, a weight heavier than any stone, hung in the cold morning air, a constant reminder of the brutal reality they were leaving behind. The first part of their journey was a descent into the forgotten heart of the forest. Father Elias, despite his age and frailty, walked with a surprising resolve, his hand clutching a small, leather-bound map he had painstakingly copied from the ancient chronicle. The map was not of routes or landmarks, but of symbols and fragmented stanzas, a puzzle of their ancestors that had lain dormant for centuries. Elara, the herbalist, was the guide, her deep, intuitive knowledge of the woods her only true compass. She knew the secret paths, the places where the light played tricks and the ground could give way to a sudden, treacherous mud pit. Her mind, once filled with the intricate patterns of roots and the medicinal properties of leaves, was now consumed by a different kind of knowledge, a chilling lexicon of malevolent things that lived in the dark. The forest itself seemed to conspire against them, its once welcoming canopy now a suffocating dome of interlocking branches. The low, mournful hum of the creature in the well, though now distant, was still a physical presence in the air, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in her bones and made the back of her neck prickle with a constant, simmering fear. It was a song of despair, and it was getting stronger with every passing hour. They moved in silence for the most part, their footsteps muffled by the thick moss and fallen leaves. The only words spoken were Elias's whispered Latin prayers and Alara's low-voiced commands, directing him around a treacherous rock or over a crumbling log. The priest, his face pale and drawn, would occasionally stop to consult the map, his long, bony finger tracing the esoteric symbols. "The chronicle says the amulet is guarded by the weeping stone," he murmured, his voice a dry, rasping sound. "And that the stone is found where the water sleeps. I believe it means a waterfall that no longer flows, a place where the stream has dried up." Elara's heart sank. She knew of such a place, a waterfall that had once roared in the spring but had long ago become a whisper of a stream, its bed now a skeletal network of bleached stones and dry silt. It was a treacherous journey, far off the known paths, into a part of the forest that was rumored to be cursed, a place where even the wolves dared not hunt. Their journey became a grueling, day-long battle against the unforgiving terrain. They crossed the stream on a makeshift log bridge, its surface slick with algae, and scrambled up a steep, rocky slope that left their lungs burning and their muscles screaming with protest. The sun, their only fleeting warmth, began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in a smear of violent purples and bruised oranges. The forest, once a symphony of life, was now unnaturally silent. There were no birdsong, no chattering of squirrels, no rustle of unseen animals in the undergrowth. The blight had reached this far, a silent wave of corruption that drained the life from everything it touched. As darkness fell, a new and more insidious terror took hold. The air grew cold, a biting chill that went straight to the bone, and Elara found herself pulling her thin cloak tighter around her. The whispers began, faint at first, then growing louder, not a sound of the wind, but of human voices, echoing her own deepest fears. They spoke of the dying village, of the villagers who had accused her, of the sickness spreading like a plague. One voice, a cruel, mocking whisper, repeated Kale's furious accusation. "This is her doing, a dark curse on our home." Another, soft and insidious, murmured promises of an end to her pain if she would just give up, just lie down and let the cold earth claim her. Elara gritted her teeth, the blood roaring in her ears, and focused on the path ahead, on the image of Old Man Garland's pale face, on the memory of the warmth of a good harvest. These were her anchors, her reason for enduring this terrifying journey. She risked a glance at Father Elias, expecting to see a man undone by the haunting voices, but found his face a mask of silent prayer, his lips moving in a constant, unwavering rhythm. His faith, a thing she had always respected but never truly understood, was his shield against the darkness, a testament to a different kind of brutal reality, that of the spirits enduring will against the world's despair. It was long past midnight when they finally reached the dried-up waterfall. It was a skeletal cascade of gray, lifeless stones, its once thundering basin a hollowed-out scar in the earth. Water still trickled from a fissure high on the cliff face, a thin, mournful tear that fell into a small, stagnant pool at the base. This, Elara realized, was the sleeping water Father Elias had spoken of. The air here was even colder, the humming from the well in Oakhaven now a low, throbbing beat that seemed to be coming from the very ground beneath her feet. And there it was, sitting on a flat rock at the center of the dried basin, was the weeping stone. It was a massive, fist-sized stone, dark and smooth as river glass, but what caught Elara's eye was the strange, dark liquid that seeped from its surface, dripping down its sides like a constant, inky tear. It was the same ichor she had seen in the fields, the same foul substance that had poisoned the land. And standing beside it, a silent, menacing sentinel, was what looked like a man. But as Elara's eyes adjusted to the pale moonlight, she saw that it was not a man, but a twisted, grotesque mockery of one. Its skin was like gray, cracked bark, its limbs impossibly long and spindly, and its face was a smooth, featureless mask, devoid of eyes or a mouth. It was a creature born of the blight, a grotesque and horrifying guard for the weeping stone. Its purpose was clear, to protect the very source of the corruption. It did not move, but its presence was a palpable, suffocating evil that made the air heavy and the sound of her own heartbeat deafening. Father Elias, seeing her fear, placed a frail, trembling hand on her shoulder. "The Chronicle calls them husk beasts," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the humming of the well. "They are made of the spirit's own substance, a manifestation of its ancient rage. We must get past it, Elara, to reach the stone. The amulet must be hidden beneath it." Elara nodded, her mind racing. A head-on confrontation was suicide. The creature was not of this world, and her knife would be useless against it. She was an herbalist, not a fighter. Her strength lay in her mind, in her knowledge of the natural world. She looked at the husk beast, at the weeping stone, and a desperate, terrifying idea formed in her mind. The creature was made of the blight, and the blight was poison. What did a poison need to be defeated? A counter-poison. A stronger, more potent substance, a powerful antidote. She looked around, her eyes scanning the desolate landscape, searching for any sign of life, of something that had not yet been consumed by the darkness. Her gaze fell on a single, gnarled sapling clinging to the side of the cliff, its leaves a vibrant, improbable green. It was an elder tree, a powerful symbol of rebirth and resilience, a thing that had survived the blight. Its roots ran deep into the earth, a lifeline of resistance. It was the key. She would not fight the beast with a sword, she would fight it with life itself. She would use the elder tree to create a counterpoison, a liquid of pure, concentrated life that would force the husk beast to retreat, giving them a chance to reach the weeping stone. This was the next brutal reality of her quest, to fight an ancient evil with the fragile, beautiful, and utterly defiant power of life. Elara's mind, which had always been so quick to catalogue and analyze, worked with a cold, desperate clarity. The husk beast, a grotesque sentinel of the blight, was a creature of corruption. It was a physical manifestation of a spiritual disease. Her small knife, her knowledge of herbs, her years of tending to the sick, none of it was a match for this ancient, malevolent force. But the elder tree, that lone bastion of vibrant green clinging to the desolate cliffside, was a testament to the fact that even in the face of overwhelming despair, life found a way. It was a plant of immense power in her craft, a symbol of rebirth and resilience, a thing that had survived the blight. Its roots ran deep into the earth, a lifeline of resistance. It was the key. Elara's gaze, a pinpoint of fierce determination in the pale moonlight, fixed on the tree. The elder, its branches gnarled and ancient, seemed to defy the very laws of nature in this blighted place. It was the antithesis of the weeping stone's dark tears. She whispered her plan to Father Elias, her voice low and urgent. She needed to get to the tree and harvest its sap and leaves, the very essence of its life force. But the husk beast stood between them and the cliff face, a silent, menacing statue of fear. The low, throbbing hum of the creature from the well in Oakhaven grew louder, a bass note of pure malevolence that resonated in her very bones. The air was thick with it, a suffocating presence that seemed to drain all the warmth and hope from the world. A sudden, deep chill settled over the small basin, a cold that was not of the season, but of a great, unblinking evil. The husk beast, its smooth, featureless face turned in their general direction, began to stir, its long, spindly fingers twitching, its head tilting to one side as if it were listening to the song of despair. Elara knew they had precious little time. She scrambled to a patch of ground and rummaged through her satchel, her hands fumbling with a small, clay pot and a sharp, bone-handled knife. She moved with a desperate, feverish energy. She would not face the beast with a sword, she would face it with life itself. Father Elias, his face pale with dread, dropped to his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. He began to whisper, his voice a low, constant murmur of Latin, ancient words of protection and prayer, a desperate plea to the heavens to intercede. His prayers were the only sound in the silent, expectant air, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. Elara, meanwhile, moved with the practiced grace of a lifetime spent in the woods. She found a small, jagged rock and used it to chip a tiny piece of the cliff face, creating a foothold. With a quick, silent prayer of her own, she began to climb. The cliff was treacherous, its surface slick with a thin layer of moss, and every movement was a risk. The humming of the well grew louder, a roaring sound in her ears, and the ground began to tremble, a low, rhythmic vibration that seemed to match the thrumming in her skull. The husk beast took a single, unnervingly silent step forward. It was not a physical threat yet, but a psychological one, a slow, methodical advance designed to break her will. Elara felt its presence, a cold, unblinking gaze on her back, even though it had no eyes. But she pressed on, her hands and feet finding holds that no one else would have seen. She reached the elder tree and, with a shudder of relief, clung to its trunk. The tree was a living thing, a bastion of warmth and strength in the cold, dead landscape. Its bark was rough beneath her fingers, a stark contrast to the slick, unfeeling surface of the rock. She quickly and carefully drew her knife, slicing a thin gash in the bark. A thick, milky sap, the very blood of the tree, began to ooze out, and she caught it in her small clay pot. She then plucked a few of its resilient, vibrant green leaves. They felt cold and firm in her hand, filled with a power that was both ancient and new. With her mission accomplished, she began the perilous descent, the tiny, clay pot clutched in her hand. When she reached the bottom, her body was trembling with exhaustion and fear. The husk beast was now only a few feet from the weeping stone, its long, spindly fingers reaching out to touch the obsidian surface. Its movements were slow, but deliberate, a dance of pure malice. Elara, her hands shaking, quickly crushed the leaves into a pulp and added them to the elder sap in the clay pot. The concoction was a vibrant, improbable green, a stark and defiant contrast to the black ichor that dripped from the weeping stone. With a silent prayer of her own, she took a shaky step forward, placing herself between the husk beast and the weeping stone. The creature stopped. It turned its featureless face towards her, its form a blacker shade of black against the pale moonlight. It did not speak, but she felt its voice in her mind, a cold, desolate whisper that spoke of her weakness, of her futility, of the inevitability of the blight. "You are just a mortal. Your life is a fleeting shadow. We are eternal." Elara took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. She held up the clay pot, the green liquid inside shimmering with an inner light. "My life may be a shadow," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "But it is a living shadow, and it is a thing of creation, not of decay." She then, with a single, fluid motion, tossed the contents of the pot onto the husk beast. The liquid, a vibrant, living essence, struck the creature with a sizzling, hissing sound. It was not fire, but a deeper, more profound reaction. The husk beast shrieked, a high-pitched, inhuman sound that scraped against the night like nails on a chalkboard. Where the green liquid touched its bark-like skin, a new, vibrant green began to spread, a web of glowing, organic light that snaked across its grotesque form. The creature writhed, a silent, agonizing dance of a thing being consumed by something it could not comprehend. Its form began to unravel, not with a burst of violence, but with a slow, agonizing dissipation, its spindly limbs turning to a fine, gray dust that was swiftly carried away by the wind. The shrieking faded, and in a matter of moments, the creature was gone, leaving nothing behind but the scent of wet earth and a lingering sense of immense, suffocating grief. A heavy silence descended upon the basin, a silence far more profound than the one that had existed before. The humming of the well was gone, and the air, though still cold, was no longer thick with malevolence. Elara, her legs weak with relief, sank to the ground, her gaze fixed on the weeping stone. Its dark, obsidian surface was now covered in a thin, vibrant film of green, a shimmering, living membrane that was slowly, inexorably, beginning to seal the dark tears that wept from its surface. With the husk beast gone, the way to the stone was clear. Elara and Father Elias rose, their bodies aching, their minds reeling, and approached the stone. The ancient symbol of their ancestors' binding ritual was etched into its surface, now glowing with a soft, ethereal green light. As they touched it, a new symbol, a complex, intricate carving of a single elder tree, began to emerge. But what was truly astonishing was the warmth it radiated, a faint, gentle heat that was the very antithesis of the cold that had been plaguing the land. Elara carefully picked it up, and as she held it, she felt a profound sense of connection, a deep, resonant understanding of the weight of her ancestors' legacy. This was it. The key to the seal, the final piece of the puzzle. The first part of the quest had been about survival, the second about discovery, the third about confronting a physical manifestation of the blight. This part, this desperate, horrifying journey into the heart of the forest, had been about finding the amulet, the one thing that could save them all. But the journey was far from over. The true test, the final, terrifying confrontation, still lay ahead. They had to get back to Oakhaven and, with the amulet in hand, seal the well and face the true source of the blight. Alara stood in the cold, desolate basin of the Elder Stone, the ancient amulet clutched in her hand. It was a single, fist-sized piece of dark ore, inscribed with the same serpentine symbols that were etched into the well in Oakhaven. But what was truly astonishing was the warmth it radiated, a faint, gentle heat that was the very antithesis of the cold that had been plaguing the land. As she held it, she felt a profound sense of connection, a deep, resonant understanding of the weight of her ancestors' legacy. Father Elias, his face etched with exhaustion, his body trembling from the ordeal, simply watched her, his silent presence a testament to his unwavering faith. The husk beast was gone, reduced to a fine, gray dust by the elder tree's life force, and the weeping stone, now a testament to life's enduring power, no longer wept its foul tears. But the victory was a fleeting one. The amulet had been found, the first step completed, but the true battle was yet to come. The well in Oakhaven, the heart of the blight, was still pulsing with malevolence, its hum a low, throbbing beat that now seemed to come from the very earth beneath their feet. They had to get back to the village, through the silent, menacing forest, and confront the very thing that was destroying their world. The journey back was a mirror image of their journey to the stone, but 100 times more perilous. The forest, which had been silent on their way in, was now a thing of active malevolence. As they began to retrace their steps, the trees themselves seemed to twist and contort, their gnarled branches reaching down like skeletal fingers to snag their clothes, their roots rising from the ground like grasping claws to trip them. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a cloying, sweet smell that made Alara's stomach churn. The whispers she had heard before returned, but this time they were not of her fears, but of the well's cold, ancient rage. It spoke directly into her mind, a voice without a mouth, a deep, resonant rumble that shook her very being. "You have taken what is mine!" It hissed, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. "You have defied me, mortal! I will break you. I will consume your home, your family, your very soul." Alara gritted her teeth, her hand tightening around the amulet. Its warmth, a counterforce to the well's chilling voice, was her only shield. She focused on that warmth, on the feel of the ancient ore, on the memory of Old Man Garland's pale face, and a new resolve took root in her heart. She was no longer just an herbalist, but a guardian, a bearer of a legacy she had never asked for. Father Elias, his eyes wide with terror, stumbled, and Alara caught him, his body frail and shaking. It knows we have it," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "It is trying to break us before we can reach it." Alara nodded, her mind racing. The blight was not just the sickness of the land, it was a spiritual evil, a thing of pure malice and despair. It was fighting them, not with physical force, but with the power of their own minds. She looked at the forest, at the twisted, menacing trees, and a new idea took shape. She was a woman of the woods. She knew its rhythms, its secrets. She would not fight this evil on its terms. She would fight it on her own. She began to sing, a low, ancient melody she had learned from her grandmother, a song of life and growth, of the earth's enduring strength. The words were a simple prayer to the forest, a plea for its aid. To their astonishment, the branches and roots began to recede, not with a burst of magic, but with a slow, hesitant withdrawal, as if the forest itself was listening. The whispers of the well did not cease, but they seemed to lose their power, their words bouncing off the shield of her song. The journey back was a long, arduous trek through a living, breathing landscape of despair, but with every step, Alara and Father Elias moved with a newfound purpose. They were not just running from the well, they were fighting it, a silent, spiritual battle waged in the heart of the ancient forest. As they emerged from the tree-line, the first rays of the morning sun struck the village of Oakhaven, revealing a scene of utter, heartbreaking desolation. The fields, once a tapestry of life, were now a wasteland of brittle, decaying stalks. The houses, their wooden frames warped and twisted by the blight, seemed to weep with a silent despair. The villagers, their faces hollowed out by fear, moved like automatons, their eyes vacant, their movements slow and listless. There was no angry mob waiting for them, no one to accuse them. There was only a profound, suffocating silence, a stillness that was far more terrifying than any storm. The well, their final destination, stood at the center of the village square, a gaping maw of darkness. The serpent-like symbols, once a subtle detail, now glowed with an eerie, pulsating light, and a foul, black ichor, a thick, putrid substance, seeped from its cracks, forming a dark puddle at its base. The well's humming, now a deafening roar, filled the air, a physical force that made the very ground tremble. It was a beacon of pure, concentrated evil, and it was waiting for them. Kale and the other villagers stood frozen, their bodies turned to the well, their eyes vacant, as if they were entranced by its malevolent light. Their silence was a new, brutal reality, a stark contrast to the angry accusations they had leveled at Alara before. It was clear now that their hatred had not been their own, but a cruel and insidious trick of the blight, a weapon it had used to turn them against each other. Alara, her heart aching with a new kind of grief, turned to Father Elias. "They are not evil," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "They are victims, just like the land." The priest, his face a mask of silent prayer, simply nodded. He knew this truth long before she did. The final confrontation was not just about sealing the well. It was about freeing their people, their home, from the blight's suffocating grasp. They moved towards the well, their footsteps the only sound in the dead silence. As they approached, the well's roar grew louder, and the ground beneath them began to crack, as if the earth itself were recoiling in terror. The black ichor pulsed, and the symbols on the well's surface glowed with a sickening, vibrant light. The well was alive, a sentient, malevolent being that was now fighting for its very existence. It was a thing of ancient rage, of a spiritual rot that had been festering for centuries, and now it was facing its one true opponent, a simple herbalist, and a frail old priest, armed with nothing but an ancient amulet and the enduring power of life. The final battle was at hand. Alara and Father Elias had come full circle, from the depths of the forest to the heart of their dying village, and they were ready to face the brutal reality of their destiny. They moved towards the well, their footsteps the only sound in the dead silence. As they approached, the well's roar, now a deafening, physical force, grew louder, and the ground beneath them began to crack, as if the earth itself were recoiling in terror. The black ichor pulsed, and the symbols on the well's surface glowed with a sickening, vibrant light. The well was alive, a sentient, malevolent being that was now fighting for its very existence. It was a thing of ancient rage, of a spiritual rot that had been festering for centuries, and now it was facing its one true opponent, a simple herbalist, and a frail old priest, armed with nothing but an ancient amulet and the enduring power of life. The well, in its final, desperate act, began to assault them not with physical force, but with the cold, insidious power of their minds. It spoke directly to their deepest fears, a voice without a mouth, a symphony of their worst nightmares. To Alara, it showed images of her family, their faces gaunt and lifeless, their bodies consumed by the blight, their final moments spent in agony. It showed her the image of her father, a strong man, now reduced to a hollowed-out shell, his eyes empty of all life. It showed her Kale, his face contorted in a silent, accusing scream. "You are too late," the voice hissed in her mind, a cold, desolate whisper. "Your home is already ours. You have sacrificed everything for nothing." To Father Elias, it showed him his life's work undone, his prayers unheard, his faith a fragile, useless thing. It showed him the faces of the villagers he had failed to save, their souls, once so full of light, now consumed by an unending darkness. It showed him the church, his sanctuary, collapsing into dust, the very foundations of his beliefs crumbling into nothingness. "Your God has abandoned you," the well's voice sneered, a sound, but Alara, her hand tightening around the amulet, felt its warmth, a counterforce to the well's chilling assault. It was the warmth of her grandmother's hand, the scent of the elder tree, the memory of her father's laugh, the love of her village, however twisted it had become. It was the enduring power of life, and it was her shield. She closed her eyes, shutting out the well's horrific visions, and focused on that warmth. She felt her feet, rooted to the earth, the very earth that had nurtured the elder tree, the same earth that she was now fighting to save. She felt Father Elias's hand on her arm, his trembling body a testament to his unwavering courage that he was not giving in to the well's lies. His prayers, which had been a low murmur, now became a powerful, resonant chant, a desperate plea to the heavens that cut through the well's roar. "For God and for man, we will not be broken!" he cried out, his voice a battle cry against the encroaching darkness. Elara opened her eyes, and she saw not a well of pure evil, but a sick and dying thing, a cancerous growth on the face of the earth. She saw a thing of desperation, of a profound and ancient loneliness. The well's power was not of strength, but of a deep, unending despair, and its rage was the last, pathetic gasp of a dying thing. With a newfound clarity, she raised the amulet. The dark ore, which had been radiating a faint warmth, now began to pulse with a fierce, brilliant light, a blinding white-green glow that was the very essence of life. "You will not have us," she said, her voice a low, steady whisper that was far more powerful than any roar. "You are a disease, and we are the cure." She then, with a final surge of strength, thrust the amulet towards the well. Father Elias, his hands still clasped together, his face a mask of silent prayer, began to chant even louder, his words a crescendo of faith and hope. The amulet, as if drawn by an invisible force, flew from her hand and embedded itself into the center of the well's glowing symbols. There was a moment of profound, breathtaking silence, a stillness so deep that it felt as if the world had stopped breathing. Then the well shrieked, a high-pitched, inhuman sound of pure agony that scraped against the sky like 1,000 nails on a chalkboard. The sound was not of rage, but of a final, complete, and utterly devastating defeat. The glowing symbols on the well's surface began to fizzle and die, and the black ichor that had been seeping from its cracks turned to a fine, gray dust that was swiftly carried away by the wind. The well, the heart of the blight, shuddered, its ancient stone walls cracking, and then, with a final, heartbreaking groan, it went silent. The well was no longer a well, but a tomb, a grave for an ancient evil. The silence that followed was a physical thing, a profound and absolute stillness that settled over the village. The air, which had been thick with the scent of decay, was now clean, filled with the fresh, invigorating scent of rain and wet earth. The sun, which had been hidden behind a perpetual blanket of gray, broke through the clouds, and its golden rays, a blindingly beautiful sight, washed over the village of Oakhaven. The villagers, who had been standing like statues, their eyes vacant and lifeless, blinked, their faces contorting in a collective gasp of pure, disbelieving relief. Cale, his face a mask of confusion, looked around, his eyes wide with a dawning awareness. The trance was broken. The blight was gone. The long, brutal night was over, and the first rays of dawn were breaking over the land. Elara, her body trembling with exhaustion, sank to her knees, her gaze fixed on the silent, inert well. Father Elias, his body shaking with a profound mixture of relief and exhaustion, fell to his knees beside her, his hands still clasped together, his lips moving in a silent prayer of thanksgiving. The quest was over, but the journey was far from done. The village was still scarred, its fields barren, its people broken, but they were no longer living in the shadow of a malevolent evil. They were free. The true work, the long, arduous process of healing the land and rebuilding their lives, was only just beginning, and with the first rays of the morning sun, Elara, the herbalist, the guardian of the earth, knew that her destiny was no longer one of a healer, but of a leader, a beacon of hope for a village that had come back from the brink of oblivion. The silence that had settled over Oakhaven was broken not by a cheer or a cry of relief, but by the quiet, disbelieving gasps of the villagers. One by one their eyes, which had been vacant and soulless, began to clear. They looked around at the desolation, at the twisted houses and the barren fields, and a profound, collective wave of confusion and shame washed over them. Cale, his body still trembling, his face a mask of utter bewilderment, was the first to speak, his voice a dry, hoarse whisper. What have we done?" he muttered, his gaze falling upon the well, now just a silent, cracked stone monument. Elara, still on her knees beside Father Elias, slowly stood up. Her body ached. Her mind was a whirlwind of exhaustion and grief. But her resolve was stronger than ever. She was no longer afraid of their judgment, their accusations. She was their hope, and she had to lead them out of this darkness. She looked at Cale, at his guilt-stricken face, and her heart went out to him. She knew that he, and all the others, had not been in control of their actions. They had been puppets, their strings pulled by an ancient, malevolent force. She was not here to accuse them, but to forgive them, to help them forgive themselves. "We have survived," she said, her voice soft but steady, and it carried across the silent village square, cutting through the thick atmosphere of shame. "The blight is gone. It is over." Father Elias, his face etched with a profound peace, slowly rose to his feet. He walked to the center of the square, his old body still frail, but his spirit renewed, and he knelt, his hands clasped together, his lips moving in a silent prayer of thanksgiving. The villagers watched him, and then, one by one, they began to follow his lead. Old man Garland, his face still pale from the blight, sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. A woman, whose young son had been afflicted, fell to her knees as well, her sobs a raw, heartbroken sound that was no longer of despair, but of a profound, shattering relief. The square was no longer a place of accusation and hatred, but of a collective, shared grief and a dawning, fragile hope. Elara stood there, watching them, her heart swelling with a powerful, unfamiliar emotion. She was not a priest, but she knew that this was the true beginning of the healing process. They had to grieve for what they had lost, for the part of themselves that had been corrupted, before they could begin to rebuild. Once the prayers were finished, and the last of the tears was shed, Elara spoke again, her voice now a beacon of purpose. "We must begin," she said, her gaze sweeping over the village. "We have no time to lose. The land is still sick, and we are still weak, but we have each other." She walked to the barren fields, her boots sinking into the dry, brittle soil. It was dead, a wasteland of decaying stalks and withered vines, a stark testament to the blight's power. She knelt, and her hand, which had held the amulet, now touched the earth. She felt a profound emptiness, a spiritual wound that ran deep, but she also felt a faint, lingering pulse of life, a deep-seated resilience that was waiting to be called upon. She knew what she had to do. The amulet, now just a simple piece of dark ore embedded in the well stone, was a symbol, not a magic tool. The true magic was in the earth, in the seeds, in the ancient knowledge of her ancestors. She had to use that knowledge to heal the land. "The soil must be turned," she told the villagers, her voice now filled with a new authority. "It must be cleansed. We will need every hand, every shovel, every rake." The villagers, still reeling from the events of the night, looked at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Cale, his face still etched with shame, was the first to move. He picked up a discarded hoe, its handle warped by the blight, and began to work the earth. Others followed his lead, and soon the village square, which had been a place of silent despair, was filled with the sounds of hard, honest labor. The rhythmic scrape of shovels, the soft thud of hoes, the low murmur of conversations, all of it was a testament to their newfound purpose. But the work was slow and arduous. The soil, as if fighting back, was hard as stone, and their bodies, weakened by the blight, quickly tired. It was a race against time. Winter was coming, and they had to plant their seeds before the first snows fell. As the days turned into weeks, the rhythm of their lives changed. The villagers were no longer just survivors. They were a community, bound by a shared purpose and a common struggle. The healing was not just of the land, but of their souls. The wounds of the past, the bitter words and the cruel accusations, were slowly being mended by the shared sweat and the hard work. Elara, the simple herbalist, was now their leader. She organized the work, she tended to their wounds, she shared her knowledge of the earth, and she listened to their stories. The legacy of their ancestors, now sealed in the silent, inert amulet, was not of a dark past, but of a brighter future, and it was a legacy that Elara was now proud to carry. That single, defiant blade of green, pushing its way through the cracked, barren earth, was the first small tremor of a great awakening, a ripple of life that would soon become a tidal wave. The news spread through the village like a whispered prayer, a fragile hope that bloomed into a robust, undeniable belief. Elara, her hands still stained with the soil, brought the first green shoots to the center of the village, and the villagers, their faces a mixture of disbelief and wonder, gathered around it. It was a simple thing, a tiny plant, but in that moment, it was more precious than gold, more beautiful than any tapestry. It was proof that their labor was not in vain, that the land, however wounded, was not dead. This singular event, this small, green miracle, was the turning point. The collective shame and despair that had shrouded the village since the Blight's defeat began to lift, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. The work, which had been slow and arduous, now took on a new fervor. The rhythmic scrape of shovels and the soft thud of hoes became a symphony of hope, a testament to their unbreakable spirit. Elara, her hands calloused and her body perpetually tired, was everywhere at once. She was no longer just a healer, she was the architect of their revival. She taught the villagers how to turn the soil to coax new life from it, how to mix natural compost from the forest floor to enrich the dead earth, and how to identify and nurture the wild, resilient herbs that had begun to grow on the edges of the cleared fields. Father Elias, for his part, worked tirelessly alongside her, not with a shovel, but with his words and his presence. He moved from group to group, offering a word of encouragement here, a silent prayer there. He listened to their stories of the Blight, the things they had said and done in their corrupted state, and he offered them a profound, unwavering forgiveness. He taught them that true healing was not just of the body, but of the soul, and that the only way to rebuild their community was to first rebuild the trust that had been so brutally broken. As the days grew shorter and the air took on the sharp, crisp scent of a coming winter, a sense of community, long lost, began to return. The men and women who had stood apart now worked side by side, their conversation no longer filled with accusation and suspicion, but with a quiet camaraderie. In the evenings, gathered around a central bonfire, they shared what little food they had, their laughter, tentative at first, growing into a strong, resonant sound that echoed through the village. The church, with its broken windows and silent bell, was slowly being repaired, a collective effort of every villager who could spare a moment from their work in the fields. It was a beautiful, imperfect process, a testament to their shared pain and their shared hope. Elara, standing on the hill overlooking the village one evening, watched as the last rays of the setting sun cast a golden glow over the fields, now a patchwork of dark, tilled earth and the first faint hints of green. She saw a child, no older than 5, laughing as she ran through the fields, her tiny feet not sinking into the brittle soil, but running over it. It was a simple sight, but it was a profound one. It was proof that life had returned, that the future was no longer a bleak, uncertain thing, but a real, tangible promise. The true enemy, she realized, was not the ancient evil of the well, but the insidious poison of despair, and they were, inch by inch, and day by day, defeating it. However, Oakhaven's return to life did not go unnoticed. One cold, blustery morning, a traveler arrived at the village gates. He was a merchant, clad in fine, embroidered robes, his cart filled with wares from a distant city. He had heard rumors of the miracle of Oakhaven, a village that had been utterly consumed by a mysterious blight, only to be reborn. He was a man of logic and commerce, and he saw not a miracle, but a business opportunity. He saw the fertile, newly tilled land, and he saw the potential for a new trade route. The villagers, wary of outsiders after their ordeal, approached him with caution. But he was a master of his trade, and he promised them riches, tools, and supplies in exchange for their first harvest. He saw Elara, her hands calloused and her face streaked with dirt, and he saw not a leader, but a simple peasant woman with a strange, mystical reputation. He dismissed her knowledge as superstition and offered to sell them modern tools and advanced seeds, promising a faster, more bountiful harvest. Elara, with a profound sense of foreboding, knew that this man, with his smooth words and his promises of easy prosperity, was a new kind of threat. He was not a monster from the depths of the earth, but a serpent of a different kind, one that sought to poison their newfound unity with the lure of greed. The villagers, their memories of the blight still fresh, listened to his promises with a mixture of hope and suspicion. They had come to trust Elara, but the merchant's words were like a siren's song, a promise of a future that was not earned through sweat and hard work, but simply bought. The long, arduous process of healing their land and rebuilding their community had just begun, and now they faced a new test, one that would force them to choose between the simple, honest path of their ancestors and the enticing, dangerous path of the outside world. The legacy of Ilara's ancestors, now sealed in the silent, inert amulet, was not just of a brighter future, but of a brighter future forged in the crucible of hard work and shared sacrifice, and she knew that this new threat, this merchant with his empty promises, was a direct challenge to that legacy. The true battle for Oakhaven, the battle for its soul, was far from over. The true battle for Oakhaven, the battle for its soul, was far from over. The merchant, a man named Valerius with eyes as sharp as his wares, did not see the village as a place of miraculous rebirth, but as a ripe, untapped market, a blank slate upon which he could etch his name and his fortune. He had arrived not just with goods, but with a philosophy, a creed of convenience and progress that was as alluring as it was dangerous. His polished wagon, laden with glinting metal tools, shovels with honed edges, rakes with smooth, unbroken teeth, and axes with a sharp, silver gleam, stood in stark contrast to the villagers' own salvaged, twisted implements. He laid out his offerings in the very square where the Blight's despair had once held sway, and as the villagers gathered, he spoke not of the past, but of the future, a future built on efficiency and trade. "Why toil for weeks in the soil, scraping at the earth like moles?" he began, his voice a smooth, captivating baritone that carried a hint of the city's practiced cadence. "When you can have this?" He held up a gleaming, perfectly balanced hoe. "This will do the work of 10 men, and for a price that is nothing compared to the bountiful harvest it will bring. Your toil is not a virtue, it is a burden. And I, Valerius, am here to lift it from your weary shoulders." He spoke of a market in the nearest city, a market hungry for produce, a market that would pay a premium for Oakhaven's miraculous, new crops. He painted a picture of prosperity that was tangible and immediate, new clothes, better food, warm blankets, and a life of comfort that they had only ever dreamed of. The villagers listened, their faces a complex mix of awe, suspicion, and a potent, dangerous desire. They had worked tirelessly, their bodies aching and their resolve tested, and the thought of an easier path was a powerful temptation. They looked at their own ragged clothes, their scarred hands, and the still present reminders of their suffering, and the merchant's words promised an escape from all of it. Old man Garland, his hands still trembling from his ordeal, was the first to approach. "These seeds you speak of," he said, his voice hesitant, "are they as strong as our own? Will they grow in this land that has known such sorrow?" Valerius laughed, a short, condescending sound. "Sorrow has nothing to do with it, old man. This land is merely in need of proper cultivation. My seeds, genetically superior, will not only grow, they will flourish, yielding crops 3 times the size of your wild, untamed heirlooms. I offer you science, not superstition." His words were a direct attack on Ilara, her methods, and the deep-seated wisdom of the land that she embodied. He did not call her by name, but his contempt was a palpable thing. He saw her as an obstacle, a relic of a primitive, ignorant past, and he sought to discredit her with every polished word. Cale, his face still a mask of profound guilt, was torn. He saw the truth in Ilara's words and the strength of their shared labor. But he also saw his family, still weak and hungry, and the promise of a bountiful, easy harvest was a siren's call he found hard to resist. He walked over to Ilara, his voice low and troubled. "Ilara," he whispered, his gaze fixed on the merchant's gleaming tools. "What if he is right? What if our way is too slow? Winter is coming, and our stores are low." Ilara, who had stood silently at the edge of the crowd, observing everything, did not waver. She knew that this was the real test. The Blight had been an external enemy, a force of nature they had to overcome, but this was a war for their very identity, a war waged on the battlefield of their hearts and minds. She walked slowly to the center of the square, her worn leather boots leaving a trail in the newly tilled earth. The villagers parted for her, and she stood before the merchant's lavish display, a woman of the earth facing a man of the city. She did not raise her voice, but her presence, her quiet authority, commanded attention. "Valerius," she began, her voice steady and calm, "you speak of burdens, but you do not understand the weight of them. The tools you offer may lift our toil, but they will also lift our purpose. We did not heal this land with a contract. We healed it with our hands, with our sweat, and with our tears. We worked together, side by side, because we had to. Our shared pain forged a new kind of community, a strength that you, with your empty promises, could never understand. Your seeds may grow faster, but will they know the story of this land? Will they know the silent prayers we whispered over the soil? Will they carry the memory of the blight, a memory that reminds us to never lose our way again? She picked up a handful of the rich, dark soil and let it sift through her fingers, a sacred, living thing. This soil is not just dirt, she said, her voice filled with a powerful, quiet passion. It is the heart of our ancestors, the legacy of a struggle that is older than your city. You offer us a shortcut, a path of least resistance, but true strength is not found in ease. It is found in hardship, in unity, in the work we do together. The well is silent now, but its spirit still lives in the earth, and it will only yield to those who honor it, not to those who seek to exploit it. Valerius, his smooth facade cracking, scoffed openly. A beautiful sentiment, he sneered. But it will not feed your children. Your legacy will not keep you warm in the winter. Your story will not stop the hunger pangs in your belly. The world does not reward sentiment, it rewards commerce. And if you do not take this opportunity, someone else will. The world is changing, and you, with your hoes and your tears, will be left behind. The villagers, a mix of hope and fear, looked from one to the other, from the merchant's gleaming, modern tools to Alara's calm, determined face. The choice was not just between two different ways of farming. It was a choice between two different ways of life. It was a choice between tradition and progress, between community and commerce, between the sacred and the profane. Father Elias, who had stood silently beside Alara, now stepped forward. He did not speak a word, but he simply looked at the villagers, his gaze a beacon of his unwavering faith in them. He looked at the church they had rebuilt with their own hands, and then he looked at the merchant's cart, a thing of cold, impersonal metal and wood. He did not need to say anything. His presence alone was a powerful sermon on the value of spiritual wealth over material gain. The decision, in the end, was not made with words, but with action. Cale, his mind made up, slowly walked past the merchant's display, past the tools that promised a life of ease, and he stood beside Alara. He picked up his old, warped hoe, its handle still bearing the scars of the blight, and he began to work the earth. Others followed his lead. One by one, they turned their backs on the merchant's siren song, choosing the difficult, honest path of their own making. Valerius, his face a mask of furious disbelief, was left standing alone in the square, his promises and his wares now utterly useless. The battle for Oakhaven's soul had been fought and won, not with a magic amulet, but with the quiet, determined courage of a people who had learned that their greatest strength was not in what they possessed, but in who they were, together. The legacy of their ancestors, now sealed in the silent, inert amulet, was not of a dark past, but of a brighter future, a future they were now more than ready to build with their own hands, one seed, one prayer, and one day at a time. The true work, the long, arduous process of healing the land and rebuilding their lives, was only just beginning, and for the first time in a very long time, Oakhaven looked towards the future, not with fear, but with a quiet, determined hope. They had faced the darkest of evils, and they had survived. They had faced the temptation of an easier path, and they had chosen their own. The spirit of Oakhaven, the spirit of resilience and community, was stronger than any blight or any merchant's empty promise, and it was a spirit that would continue to grow, to flourish, to heal their land, and to guide them towards a brighter future, a future they had earned through their own sacrifice and their own unwavering faith in each other. With Valerius's departure, a profound, almost palpable sense of peace settled over the village, a stillness that was not of emptiness, but of a quiet, renewed purpose. The villagers, their choice made, returned to their work with a fresh vigor, their hands digging into the soil with a shared, powerful resolve. The conversation around the bonfire that evening was no longer a whispered debate of Valerius's promises, but a proud recounting of their defiance. They spoke of the wisdom of Alara's words, the quiet strength of Father Elias's presence, and the collective courage they had found in their shared struggle. Their rejection of the merchant was not just a refusal of his wares. It was a rejection of his very philosophy, a declaration that their true wealth lay not in what they possessed, but in the community they had rebuilt with their own hands. The single, small green shoot in the tilled earth was no longer a solitary miracle, but the first of many. As the weeks passed, the barren fields, once a testament to the blight's power, began to transform into a patchwork of vibrant green. The new life, coaxed from the soil with a mixture of Elara's ancient knowledge and the villagers' hard work, grew with a speed and a strength that was astonishing. The crops were not the perfect, uniform plants Valerius had promised, but they were strong, resilient, and they were their own. They were a testament to their victory, a living monument to their collective spirit. However, as the sun began to set on the season, bringing with it the crisp, cold air of autumn, a new challenge arose, one that was far more insidious than a blighted well or a deceitful merchant. It was the challenge of their own past. One evening, as the villagers gathered around the bonfire, their hearts light with a shared sense of accomplishment, a young girl, no older than 10, asked Elara a simple, heartbreaking question. "Elara," she began, her voice a small, wavering whisper. "My mother, she never talks about my father. He was a good man, but he changed. He said terrible things, and then he just disappeared. Why?" A profound silence fell over the group. The question, so simple and so innocent, was a mirror held up to their collective face, reflecting a truth they had all been trying to forget. The blight had not just killed their crops and corrupted their souls, it had torn families apart, sowing seeds of division and hatred that were far harder to heal than any physical wound. The villagers, many of whom had lost loved ones to the blight, or had done unspeakable things to their neighbors, had chosen to bury the memories, to seal them away in a secret place in their hearts. They had focused on the future, on the rebuilding, but the past, like a ghost in the fog, had returned to haunt them. Elara, her gaze on the young girl's face, felt a profound, almost physical ache of sorrow. She knew that the girl's question was not just about her father, but about all the lost and broken souls of Oakhaven, about the memories they had chosen to forget, about the guilt they had chosen to ignore. She knew that the true healing of their village could not begin until they faced their past, until they unburied the unwritten stories of the blight, until they gave voice to the sorrow and the pain they had so carefully hidden away. She knew that this was a task that she, and she alone, could not lead. This was a task for the entire community, a task that required a shared courage, a shared vulnerability. She looked at Father Elias, his face etched with a profound sense of understanding, and he gave her a small, solemn nod. He, too, had heard the unspoken question in the girl's voice, and he, too, knew that this was the final, and most difficult, challenge they had to face. The next morning, as the sun rose over the fields, now a vibrant, life-giving green, the villagers gathered not for work, but for a different kind of labor. Elara, her voice a quiet, resolute sound, stood before them. "We have healed the land," she began, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her community. "We have defeated the blight. But there is one more thing we must do. We must heal our hearts." She then began to speak, not of the future, but of the past. She spoke of her own journey, of the fear and the loneliness, of the moments of despair when she had almost given in to the well's siren song. She spoke of the courage of her ancestors, of the silent, enduring power of the amulet. One by one, the villagers followed her lead. Kale, his voice a raw, choked whisper, spoke of the terrible things he had said to his wife and children, the words of hatred and suspicion that had been planted in his heart by the blight's poison. Old man Garland spoke of the friend he had accused of hoarding food, a lie he had believed with all his heart. A woman, her face streaked with tears, spoke of the moment she had turned her back on her sister's face a mirror of the blight's despair. The square, once a place of accusations and silent hatred, was now a place of confession and tears, a profound, heartbreaking chorus of shared pain. Father Elias, he told them that they were not defined by the things they had done in their corrupted state, but by the courage they were now showing, by their willingness to face their past and to heal their wounds. He told them that true absolution came not from a priest, but from their own hearts, from their willingness to forgive each other and to forgive themselves. The process was slow and arduous, a long, difficult journey through the dark, haunted landscapes of their memories. But with every story told, with every tear shed, with every word of forgiveness spoken, the village grew stronger, their community tighter, their bonds deeper. They had faced a physical evil and a philosophical one, but now, they were facing the most difficult one of all, themselves. And with every passing day, they were winning. The unwritten stories of the Blight were now being written, one confession, one tear, one moment of shared vulnerability at a time. And with every word, they were not just healing their village, they were forging a new, stronger, and more beautiful identity, a legacy that was no longer just of their ancestors, but of their own, a legacy that would be passed down from generation to generation. A testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome even the most insidious and ancient evils. A sense of profound unity and tranquility had settled over Oakhaven, a feeling that had never been known before. The very ground that once harbored the seeds of doubt and hatred now nurtured the shoots of trust and empathy, and every villager saw their own pain mirrored in the eyes of their neighbor, a shared understanding that fortified the very foundation of their community. At night, when the sun's final rays touched the fields, each crop glowed with the same radiance that shone from their faces, the brilliance of a new beginning, a fresh belief. Elara, Cale and his wife, Garland and Elias, they were no longer just neighbors but had become a family, bound by a new, unbreakable tie. Yet, in the midst of this peace, an invisible ripple was spreading. As each person purged the poison from within, that very poison was purified at the bottom of the well, in its depths. The well, which once spread illness, was now becoming cleaner with each passing day. At first, only a faint blue light appeared on its surface, as if a star had fallen into the water. The next day, the light grew stronger, and after that, it intensified every day until, even in the darkness of night, the entire village was illuminated by its gentle glow. Some people began to call it the light of new hope. The effects of this light were not confined to the village. They spread to the surrounding forests and rivers. Where once there were dry and dead trees, now there were glowing trees growing, and the river water had a faint blue sheen, and wherever it flowed, vibrant plants and fruits that even the oldest villagers had never seen before began to sprout. Even on the road leading to the city, the air and earth carried a new freshness, a scent that surprised travelers. The news of this scent, this strange light, and the extraordinary prosperity of their fields began to spread far and wide. One day, something happened that astonished the entire village. In the sunlight, a shimmering wave rose from the well, soaring towards the sky and forming a blue smoke. This smoke spread out over Oakhaven like a protective canopy. A few days after this event, the sound of horses came from the east. These horses were not like Valerius's. They were strong, and the people riding them wore very different clothes, with an unusual sheen. They held strange banners, either military nor mercantile. When they reached Oakhaven, their horses stopped briefly before the light of the well, as if a mystical force had halted them. At the head of this group was a woman, around 40 years old, with a face full of wisdom and a rare peace in her eyes. Her clothes were adorned with various strange symbols. When she arrived in the center of the village, she dismounted and, unlike Valerius, did not speak of trade or utter any provocative words. She said something in a strange language, after which her companions took out various tools and began to measure things around the well. Elara, Cale, and others watched them, deeply concerned. They did not understand who these people were or what they had come for. Elara stepped forward and asked the woman, "Who are you, and what have you come here for?" The woman slowly raised her head. Her eyes held a light brimming with knowledge and power. She said in that same strange language, "We are the people of Ethelred, who understand this power, who recognize this light." Then, she instantly switched languages and said to Elara, "We understand power, and power is supreme to us. We have seen this light from a great distance, and we have come to understand it and to conduct research so that we may spread this power everywhere." Her companions began to move around the village, as if measuring the power of every single thing. Elara said to her fellow villagers, "These are not merchants, they are scholars. They recognize our power." "Power?" Cale asked. "What power are we talking about?" "We are talking about the power you used to drive Valerius away," Elara said, looking at Cale. "We are talking about the power for which we all united. The scholars of Ethelred began to measure everything, whether it was standing trees or flowing water. They measured everything and recorded it in their tools. One morning, when Elara was playing with her daughter, the woman from Ethelred approached her. "There is a different kind of light in your daughter," the woman said. Elara was scared. The light in her daughter's eyes was something she had never seen before. "What do you mean?" Elara asked. "What is it about my daughter that attracts you so much?" "Within her is the power we call Prabhat," the woman said, "which is born only in people who possess remarkable power. This power is not just in your villagers, but this light has made it even more intense. We want to take this light with us to research it, so that we can spread this power to all the world." Elara looked at her angrily. "We will not let this power go anywhere. This power is for us, for our future generations. This power is not just for you," the woman said. "It is for the entire world. We can use this power and bring peace and prosperity to the whole world with it." Elara refused, and the woman silently returned to her place. Elara was worried by this incident. She told Father Elias and Kale about it. All the villagers became concerned. They did not know what to do. This time, they were not facing an evil force or a merchant. This time, they were facing people who were even more powerful than them. They had given birth to a new storm with their unity, and now they had to prepare to face that storm. A profound and unnerving silence descended upon the gathering of Oakhaven's villagers, a silence far more potent than the blighted whispers of their past. The words of the Ethelred scholar echoed in their minds, not as a threat of force like Valerius, but as a far more insidious proposition, the appropriation of their soul's deepest manifestation for the sake of abstract knowledge. The very ground they stood on, their hard-won peace, and the radiant hope glowing from the well, all of it felt suddenly vulnerable, a prize to be studied, measured, and ultimately taken. Elara's initial fear transformed into a cold, unwavering resolve. She looked at her daughter, who was innocently clutching a small, glowing pebble, a piece of the well's light she had found earlier. That light, the Prabhat the scholar had spoken of, was not a scientific phenomenon to be dissected. It was the sacred, living embodiment of their collective sacrifice, the physical form of their healing. It was her daughter's laughter, the quiet forgiveness of the old man Garland, the raw, choked confessions of Kale, and the unwavering faith of Father Elias. This was not a resource to be shared with a world that had abandoned them in their darkest hour. Father Elias stepped forward, his weathered hand resting gently on Elara's shoulder. His voice was low but carried a weight that held everyone's attention. "We have faced corruption, and we have faced avarice," he began, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the Ethelred scholars. "But you come to us with a different kind of hunger. You seek to understand the light, but you have not lived in the darkness that birthed it. What gives you the right to claim our story?" The lead scholar, whose name was Althea, did not flinch. Her eyes, as clear as mountain springs, were not unkind, merely devoid of sentiment. She gestured to her companions. "We are of a world that thrives on understanding. Your story is the very reason we are here. Our instruments have detected an energy signature of a purity and potency never before recorded. To ignore it, to leave it to a single, isolated village, would be a crime against all of humanity. Think of the applications. This power could end famines, heal incurable diseases, and bring an age of unparalleled enlightenment. This is not about taking, it is about sharing, and guiding you toward a future where this power is used for the good of all, not just a few." A new wave of fear and confusion rippled through the villagers. Althea's words were a poison, more subtle than the blight, because they spoke of noble intentions. Valerius had promised them wealth for their surrender. Althea promised them a grand purpose, a greater good. It was the same trap, just wrapped in a different, more intellectual guise. They were being asked to trade their autonomy for a promise of a better world they didn't ask for. He told them that they were not defined by the things they had done in their corrupted state, but by the courage they were now showing, by their willingness to face their past and to heal their wounds. He told them that true absolution came not from a priest, but from their own hearts, from their willingness to forgive each other and to forgive themselves. The process was slow and arduous, a long, difficult journey through the dark, haunted landscapes of their memories. But with every story told, with every tear shed, With every word of forgiveness spoken, the village grew stronger, their community tighter, their bonds deeper. They had faced a physical evil and a philosophical one, but now, they were facing the most difficult one of all, themselves. And with every passing day, they were winning. The unwritten stories of the Blight were now being written, one confession, one tear, one moment of shared vulnerability at a time. And with every word, they were not just healing their village, they were forging a new, stronger, and more beautiful identity, a legacy that was no longer just of their ancestors, but of their own, a legacy that would be passed down from generation to generation. A testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome even the most insidious and ancient evils. A sense of profound unity and tranquility had settled over Oakhaven, a feeling that had never been known before. The very ground that once harbored the seeds of doubt and hatred now nurtured the shoots of trust and empathy, and every villager saw their own pain mirrored in the eyes of their neighbor, a shared understanding that fortified the very foundation of their community. At night, when the sun's final rays touched the fields, each crop glowed with the same radiance that shone from their faces, the brilliance of a new beginning, a fresh belief. Elara, Cale and his wife, Garland and Elias, they were no longer just neighbors but had become a family, bound by a new, unbreakable tie. Yet in the midst of this peace, an invisible ripple was spreading. As each person purged the poison from within, that very poison was purified at the bottom of the well, in its depths. The well, which once spread illness, was now becoming cleaner with each passing day. At first, only a faint blue light appeared on its surface, as if a star had fallen into the water. The next day, the light grew stronger, and after that, it intensified every day until, even in the darkness of night, the entire village was illuminated by its gentle glow. Some people began to call it the light of new hope. The effects of this light were not confined to the village. They spread to the surrounding forests and rivers. Where once there were dry and dead trees, now there were glowing trees growing, and the river water had a faint blue sheen, and wherever it flowed, vibrant plants and fruits that even the oldest villagers had never seen before began to sprout. Even on the road leading to the city, the air and earth carried a new freshness, a scent that surprised travelers. The news of this scent, this strange light, and the extraordinary prosperity of their fields began to spread far and wide. One day, something happened that astonished the entire village. In the sunlight, a shimmering wave rose from the well, soaring towards the sky and forming a blue smoke. This smoke spread out over Oakhaven like a protective canopy. A few days after this event, the sound of horses came from the east. These horses were not like Valerius's. They were strong, and the people riding them wore very different clothes, with an unusual sheen. They held strange banners, either military nor mercantile. When they reached Oakhaven, their horses stopped briefly before the light of the well, as if a mystical force had halted them. At the head of this group was a woman, around 40 years old, with a face full of wisdom and a rare peace in her eyes. Her clothes were adorned with various strange symbols. When she arrived in the center of the village, she dismounted and, unlike Valerius, did not speak of trade or utter any provocative words. She said something in a strange language, after which her companions took out various tools and began to measure things around the well. Elara, Cale, and others watched them, deeply concerned. They did not understand who these people were or what they had come for. Elara stepped forward and asked the woman, "Who are you, and what have you come here for?" The woman slowly raised her head. Her eyes held a light brimming with knowledge and power. She said in that same strange language, "We are the people of Ethelred, who understand this power, who recognize this light." Then, she instantly switched languages and said to Elara, "We understand power, and power is supreme to us. We have seen this light from a great distance, and we have come to understand it and to conduct research so that we may spread this power everywhere." Her companions began to move around the village, as if measuring the power of every single thing. Elara said to her fellow villagers, "These are not merchants, they are scholars. They recognize our power." "Power?" Cale asked. "What power are we talking about?" "We are talking about the power you used to drive Valerius away," Elara said, looking at Cale. "We are talking about the power for which we all united." The scholars of Ethelred began to measure everything, whether it was standing trees or flowing water. They measured everything and recorded it in their tools. One morning, when Elara was playing with her daughter, the woman from Ethelred approached her. "There is a different kind of light in your daughter," the woman said. Elara was scared. The light in her daughter's eyes was something she had never seen before. "What do you mean?" Elara asked. "What is it about my daughter that attracts you so much?" "Within her is the power we call Prabhat," the woman said, "which is born only in people who possess remarkable power. This power is not just in your villagers, but this light has made it even more intense. We want to take this light with us to research it, so that we can spread this power to all the world." Elara looked at her angrily. "We will not let this power go anywhere. This power is for us, for our future generations. This power is not just for you," the woman said. "It is for the entire world. We can use this power and bring peace and prosperity to the whole world with it." Elara refused, and the woman silently returned to her place. Elara was worried by this incident. She told Father Elias and Kale about it. All the villagers became concerned. They did not know what to do. This time, they were not facing an evil force or a merchant. This time, they were facing people who were even more powerful than them. They had given birth to a new storm with their unity, and now they had to prepare to face that storm. A profound and unnerving silence descended upon the gathering of Oakhaven's villagers, a silence far more potent than the blighted whispers of their past. The words of the Ethelred scholar echoed in their minds, not as a threat of force like Valerius, but as a far more insidious proposition, the appropriation of their soul's deepest manifestation for the sake of abstract knowledge. The very ground they stood on, their hard-won peace, and the radiant hope glowing from the well, all of it felt suddenly vulnerable, a prize to be studied, measured, and ultimately taken. Elara's initial fear transformed into a cold, unwavering resolve. She looked at her daughter, who was innocently clutching a small, glowing pebble, a piece of the well's light she had found earlier. That light, the Prabhat the scholar had spoken of, was not a scientific phenomenon to be dissected. It was the sacred, living embodiment of their collective sacrifice, the physical form of their healing. It was her daughter's laughter, the quiet forgiveness of the old man Garland, the raw, choked confessions of Kale, and the unwavering faith of Father Elias. This was not a resource to be shared with a world that had abandoned them in their darkest hour. Father Elias stepped forward, his weathered hand resting gently on Elara's shoulder. His voice was low but carried a weight that held everyone's attention. "We have faced corruption, and we have faced avarice," he began, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the Ethelred scholars. "But you come to us with a different kind of hunger. You seek to understand the light, but you have not lived in the darkness that birthed it. What gives you the right to claim our story?" The lead scholar, whose name was Althea, did not flinch. Her eyes, as clear as mountain springs, were not unkind, merely devoid of sentiment. She gestured to her companions. "We are of a world that thrives on understanding. Your story is the very reason we are here. Our instruments have detected an energy signature of a purity and potency never before recorded. To ignore it, to leave it to a single, isolated village, would be a crime against all of humanity. Think of the applications. This power could end famines, heal incurable diseases, and bring an age of unparalleled enlightenment. This is not about taking, it is about sharing, and guiding you toward a future where this power is used for the good of all, not just a few." A new wave of fear and confusion rippled through the villagers. Althea's words were a poison, more subtle than the blight, because they spoke of noble intentions. Valerius had promised them wealth for their surrender. Althea promised them a grand purpose, a greater good. The frigid night air seemed to hum with the immense, living power of the well as Elara knelt beside it, her hands hovering just above the water's surface, feeling the tangible, vibrant energy radiate from its depths. It was not a heat, but a light, not a hum, but a resonance that seemed to vibrate in her very bones, a silent, ancient language that spoke of sacrifice and rebirth. She looked at her reflection in the glowing water, not seeing the weary face of a village leader, but the ghost of a mother who had once prayed for a single drop of clean water, a woman who had known the crushing weight of hopelessness and the sting of betrayal. The memory of the blight, the creeping, suffocating darkness that had turned neighbor against neighbor, was as real to her in that moment as the pulse of the light beneath her hands. The scholars had been right. The light was intrinsically tied to them, a direct manifestation of their collective spirit. But where they saw a volatile, unstable phenomenon, Alara saw a mirror. The light was their vulnerability, their forgiveness, their fragile hope, and to give it away to a world that did not understand its source would be to invite a new, more insidious kind of blight. But to hoard it, to let the young girl at the edge of the village die of a fever, was to betray the very compassion that had given the light its power. This was not a problem to be solved with a simple yes or no. It was a moral abyss, a test of whether Oakhaven had truly healed. She rose to her feet, her mind clear of doubt, and made her way back to the heart of the village, her steps carrying the weight of a decision that would change everything. The next morning, the villagers gathered at the village center, their faces etched with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Alara stood before them, not as the girl who had once led them to war, but as the woman who had guided them to peace, her posture radiating a calm authority they had come to trust. "We will heal the girl," she announced, her voice ringing out with a finality that silenced the murmurs. "But we will not become a marketplace for miracles." The crowd watched stunned, as she walked towards the village edge where the sick girl lay, her father sitting vigil, his face a mask of grief. Alara knelt beside her, and instead of taking water from the well, she took a smooth, polished stone from her pocket, one that had been charged with the well's light. "This light," she said, her eyes meeting the father's, "is not for sale. It is a gift earned through a promise." She explained that the healing would be given freely, but in return, the father and his daughter would have to spend a full moon cycle in Oakhaven, not as patients, but as members of their community, sharing a truth of their own, a burden they carried, so that they too could contribute to the collective well of grace. The father, bewildered but desperate, readily agreed. Alara then placed the glowing stone in the girl's hands. Slowly, the fevers broke, and a faint, healthy color returned to her cheeks, a quiet miracle witnessed by all. The act of healing the girl was not the end of the debate, but the beginning of a new, far more complicated one. The villagers were forced to confront the true meaning of their light. It was not a cure-all, not a commodity, but an exchange, a spiritual and emotional transaction that required vulnerability and truth. This was their new way. For every healing, a confession. For every miracle, a piece of a stranger's story. It was a terrifying new path, a fragile balance between compassion and self-preservation. Some, like Garland, saw it as a profound act of grace, a way to share their hard-won knowledge with the world. But Elias, ever the pragmatist, saw the immense, unsustainable burden they were placing on themselves. "You have not just healed a girl, Alara," he warned her, his voice low with concern. "You have built a bridge. And now, the whole world knows the way to our doorstep." As he spoke, another traveler arrived, then another, and soon a small caravan of desperate souls gathered at the edge of the village, their eyes full of a hope born of desperation, a hope that now looked to Oakhaven for salvation. The village was no longer a sanctuary, it was a beacon, and the flickering light of their miracle had become a heavy, inescapable burden. The silence that fell over the village that night was no longer the quiet of peace, but the quiet before the storm, the tense stillness of a people bracing themselves for an uncertain future. What was once a humble village was now the guardian of a universal truth, a responsibility far greater than any one of them had ever imagined. The quiet before the storm lasted only a moment, a final, fleeting gasp of peace before the torrent of the outside world crashed upon Oakhaven's gates, transforming the village from a quiet refuge into the epicenter of a desperate, unending pilgrimage. Elias's words, "You have built a bridge," echoed with a chilling, prophetic resonance as the single caravan multiplied into dozens, then hundreds, a river of humanity flowing towards the glow of the well. The villagers, once a close-knit community of survivors, found themselves overwhelmed, their simple lives replaced by an exhausting, emotional maelstrom. Every day brought new faces, each etched with a different story of suffering, a new burden for the people of Oakhaven to carry. The system Alara had devised, confession for healing, had seemed so profoundly simple at first, a beautiful exchange of trust for grace, but the sheer volume of pain quickly turned it into a heavy, crushing ritual. The healers, once a small, dedicated group, now worked from dawn until dusk, their hands weary, their hearts heavy with the weight of the stories they were entrusted with. They heard tales of famine, of lost children, of unrequited love, and of betrayals so deep they had festered into physical ailments. Each story was a stone added to a growing cairn of grief in their souls, and as the pile grew, so too did their exhaustion and their own burgeoning, unspoken resentments. Garland, his initial compassionate zeal now replaced by a quiet fatigue, would often sit alone after a long day, his hands clasped over his weary eyes, the echoes of a dozen whispered tragedies playing on a loop in his mind. The well's light, once a source of comfort, now seemed to Alara to mock her with its boundless, effortless power. It could heal the bodies of these thousands, but who would heal the souls of the few who were tasked with bearing their stories? The village's physical landscape began to change as well. The fields, once meticulously tended to grow enough for themselves, now lay fallow, ignored in the face of the unending flow of human need. The village square, which had once hosted seasonal festivals, was now a makeshift infirmary and a constant, low-level cacophony of coughing, weeping, and the restless shifting of the sick. The villagers, who had spent a lifetime building their home, now found themselves strangers in it, their simple routines shattered by the demands of a world they had tried to leave behind. Alara herself bore the heaviest burden. She was no longer just the village elder, but the judge and the arbiter, the one who had to decide whose stories were genuine and whose were lies told to gain access to the healing light. One day, a man with a suspiciously clean tunic and a practiced sob story of a sick sister was turned away by a wary Elias. He returned the next day, not with tears, but with a hard, aggressive anger, demanding to be healed, his true colors showing plainly in his threatening words. "You can't keep a miracle to yourself forever, old man," he snarled, his voice a lone menace. "The world has a way of taking what it wants." This single, ugly encounter was a turning point. It was no longer just the sick arriving, but also the cunning, the manipulative, and the desperate who saw Oakhaven's light not as a gift, but as a resource to be plundered. The villagers, already strained by the emotional toll, now had to fortify themselves, to become suspicious and guarded again, the very qualities they had fought so hard to shed. The fear of another blight, a new darkness born not of magic but of human greed, began to creep back into their hearts, a cold tendril of doubt that threatened to snuff out the light of the well from within. The radiant glow that had once been their salvation now felt like a spotlight, a blinding, relentless attention that they could no longer escape, and the most frightening truth of all was that the endless, unstoppable tide of the world had only just begun to reach their shores. The trickle of the desperate became a flood of the demanding, and the subtle, creeping fear Elias had warned of became a tangible, suffocating presence that wrapped itself around Oakhaven like a shroud. The first to arrive had been the sick and the grieving, their pleas a desperate song that the villagers had answered with open hearts. But the subsequent waves were different. They came not just with ailments, but with expectations, not with stories of sorrow, but with demands for a cure, as if the well were a vending machine and its light a purchasable good. Traders, opportunists, and even armed mercenaries began to appear on the village's periphery, their eyes not on the sick, but on the luminous core of the well, their conversations a cold, calculating hum about its potential value and the vulnerability of its protectors. This new, predatory gaze was more terrifying to Alara than any magical blight had ever been. She watched as the hopeful line of pilgrims was replaced by a more aggressive throng, their faces hardened by a world that had taught them that power, not compassion, was the only currency that mattered. The once sacred act of healing was now a source of immense tension. When a wealthy merchant offered a king's ransom for a single, small vial of the well's glowing water, Garland, his face pale with fury, had to be physically restrained by Elias. "This is not for sale!" Garland had roared, his voice cracking with the strain of his idealism colliding with the ugly reality of human greed. The merchant, unfazed, simply smiled, a thin, cruel slash across his face. "Everything has a price, boy," he had sneered, his words a poison that infected the fragile trust of the villagers. Alara knew they could not continue this way. The healers were on the verge of emotional collapse, their empathy worn thin by the unceasing flow of pain and the corrosive cynicism of the new arrivals. The villagers themselves were becoming suspicious of one another, each person looking at their neighbor, wondering who would be the first to break, to succumb to the lure of wealth and power, to betray the promise that had saved them all. The well's light, once a symbol of unity, was becoming the very thing that threatened to tear them apart. A secret meeting was called in the dead of night, the village elders huddling around a flickering candle, their faces gaunt with worry. Elias, ever the realist, proposed a radical solution. They had to build a wall. Not a physical wall to keep people out, but a metaphorical one. They would cease the public healing, close the gates of their compassion, and let the outside world consume itself with its own greed. But Alara refused, her hands trembling as she held them to the well's light, its energy a rebuke to Elias's cold logic. "We cannot! The light is not ours to withhold. It is a gift, and a gift must be given." But how could they give a gift to a world that saw it as a commodity? Her answer came to her in a dream, a whispered truth from the well itself. The light, it seemed to say, was not just for healing, it was for transformation. They would not turn people away, but they would change the terms of the exchange entirely. They would not offer a cure, but a choice. The next day, Alara stood before the growing mob at the village gates, her voice as clear and resonant as the bell in the tower. "We will heal one more person," she announced, her words cutting through the clamor. "But that person must be chosen by you." A ripple of confusion and distrust passed through the crowd, but Alara held her ground, her gaze unyielding. "You will choose the most deserving among you," she declared, her challenge a gauntlet thrown at their feet. The mob, which had been so unified in its anger and need, now turned on itself, each person arguing their own unique suffering, their own profound worthiness. This was the true test, the true burden of guardianship, and Alara watched with a heavy heart as the well's light, which had once united them, now began to expose the deepest, darkest divisions in the hearts of those who sought it. The strange coolness Alara felt was not a simple sensation, but a profound and shattering reordering of her very soul, a silent, cosmic recalibration that made the pain in her heart not an ache to be healed, but a solid, enduring thing, a memory to be cherished, a scar to be worn with a quiet, fierce pride. A feeling so alien, and yet so undeniably correct that it made her question everything she had ever known about healing and forgiveness, for the man in the dark cloak had spoken not of absolution, but of acceptance, a philosophy that seemed to resonate with the very core of the land they had so painstakingly restored. His voice, now a low, captivating murmur that effortlessly carried to every corner of the village square, was not an orator's voice, not a priest's, but a chronicler's, a storyteller's, weaving a new truth from the threads of their shared sorrow. He spoke of the blight not as a curse, but as an event, a defining moment in their history that had etched its terrible lessons into the very heart of the village. "You sought to forget," he said, his words soft as falling ash. "To bury your shame beneath a new layer of green. But a plant without deep roots will always wither in the frost. Your pain is your root. The memories of your loss are the stories that hold you together. To heal them is to erase them. To forget them is to become a blank page, ready to be written upon by the next blight, by the next merchant with his empty promises." He looked directly at Alara, his gaze impossibly dark, and she felt a chilling certainty that he was not just speaking to the crowd, but to her, his words a direct challenge to her leadership, to the very foundation of her beliefs. He did not offer to heal anyone. Instead, he walked into the crowd, his feet silent on the hard-packed earth, and stopped before a woman whose face was permanently twisted with a silent, profound grief, a grief for the son she had lost to the blight, a son whose name she had not spoken in months. The man did not touch her, did not offer a soothing word. He simply raised his hand, and a shimmering, ghostly image of a small boy with bright, laughing eyes appeared in the air between them, an image that was not a ghost, but a memory made visible, a living echo of a moment that had been buried in the mother's heart. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, a mix of awe and terror, as the mother, her face a mask of shock, reached out to touch the image of her son, and for the first time since his death, tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow, but of a quiet, profound relief, a relief that her son's memory had not been forgotten. "His pain is not gone," the man said, his voice a balm to the woman's soul. "It is here, and it is a part of you. Do not let it define you, but let it guide you. Let it remind you of the love you had, and the love that you are still capable of." He then turned and addressed the crowd once more, his message a shocking, beautiful, and dangerous alternative to the hope they had been clinging to. You have been told that your past is a weight to be shed, a darkness to be forgotten. But I tell you this, your past is a story to be carried. Your scars are not blemishes, but the chapters of your life. The well gives you light, yes, but I offer you a truth that is far more powerful. I offer you the unshakable power of your own pain. The crowd, which had been so fractured and so full of resentment, now fell into a stunned silence, their arguments forgotten in the face of this new, terrifying philosophy. Elara watched as the villagers of Oakhaven, the ones she had led through the depths of despair, now looked at this new figure, this chronicler of suffering, with a mixture of fear and a dangerous, nascent fascination. They had just rejected a merchant who promised them a life without struggle, only to be offered a man who promised them a life defined by their struggle, and in the strange, twisted logic of their reality, it was an offer that resonated far more deeply with their souls. Elias, his face pale with a deep, spiritual dread, stepped forward. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice a tremor of a true priest facing a true prophet, a true light facing a true shadow. The man simply smiled, a cold, detached expression that did not touch his dark eyes. "I am the one who finds the stories that have been lost to the fog," he answered, his gaze sweeping over the village. "Your blight was not a local tragedy, but a temporal ripple, a symptom of a much larger infection that erases histories, that unwrites the very threads of existence. I am here to find the unwritten, to give voice to the forgotten, to give purpose to the meaningless." His gaze then settled upon Elara, a cold, unnerving focus that made her shiver despite the heat of the bonfire. "And you, Elara, are a part of that story. The amulet you carry is not just a tool to heal a village, it is a key, a beacon, a living fragment of a story that was almost erased. I am here to find a book, a library of all the unwritten, a nexus where all the lost moments from all realities were said to have been stored. And your amulet, Elara, is the only one that can open the way." The amulet, which had been a quiet, steady weight against her skin, now pulsed with a frantic, rhythmic beat, a silent, resonant roar that announced a new beginning, a new purpose for her, a singular warrior in a war that transcended her world, and the chronicler, seeing the amulet's reaction, simply smiled, a knowing expression that spoke of an ancient, unending war between two forces, those who seek to heal the wounds of the past, and those who seek to use them as fuel for a dark and terrifying future. The true battle for Oakhaven, the battle for its very soul, had just begun.